Richard Steed, it is my honor and privilege to welcome you to the podcast studio at iSigma this year. Thank you for being here.
Tom, it's a pleasure to visit
I think today is a pretty special day because today you were awarded the Robert Johnson Memorial, what's the name?
Lifetime Achievement Award.
Lifetime Achievement Award. Sorry, my brain is like seriously decayed right now. The Lifetime Achievement Award. And I think it's worth you telling us the lifetime you've had in this industry, just in a nutshell. But it's not like you've been in this industry for 10 years. It's like you've been here a long time. So go back to the very first time you entered something related to this industry. What's your first memory of this industry? In your, like, when you first got a job in this industry, how did you find your way into the industry?
I started with Pacific Storage Company literally 40 years ago. Was my December was the culmination of my 40th year. So as my wife reminds me, I'm in my 41st year. At the time, my father-in-law was the manager. We were having the moving and storage company. He wanted me to come work for him. He lost his sales executive, and I was in the middle of graduate school. My goal was to get my MBA, and I was going to study business, and I felt I needed 4 years of marketing. So I told my father-in-law I'll give him 4 years, and the rest is history. There's more in between, but I literally ventured in the industry to just get some marketing experience because I was going to go to work for corporate America. I did my paper on American Express. I was going to become a big executive.
That was your MBA paper?
That was my MBA paper.
Okay, and you did it on American Express.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so you came in as a sales rep for a moving company, though.
Correct.
So when did that moving company start to connect to, because record storage was it already happening when you came, or had they not started yet?
Pacific Storage had already been a vendor. They already had that service. So it had been, I think Pacific Storage started record storage about 65 to 70 years ago.
Really?
So it'd been about 20 years, yeah.
Okay, so they were already doing it, but you're in Sacramento, so was it primarily for the government at that point?
No, just local offices.
Okay.
In fact, just a point of kind of uniqueness, I remember we did record storage. This is going to go way back for those who probably have an understanding. Prior to barcoding, we used manual paper.
Yep.
And you'd write the location of the box and you'd write the location of the warehouse. So it was a specific designated section. And
it wasn't the Flex system or the.
It wasn't.
And we had that too in our record center way back in the day, and we tried to build software before they knew their software. But that was the original way we started. Was a fixed. What do we call that? Fixed shelf.
Fixed location.
Fixed location. Right. Yeah.
Bob Foy, pioneer, great innovator. He led the company. He hired me, as I shared earlier today. He hired me, and at the time, Beacons had their annual conferences. They traveled around, but the annual conference for Beacons was here in San Diego. It wasn't at this hotel, but I know it was a marina somewhere.
Yeah.
So we literally had a Beacons conference down here, and he put a little note that said, hey, there's this new company that they're introducing a new technology called barcode. So O'Neill Systems had rented a suite at a Beacons Moving conference, and it was the first time we were exposed to this concept called barcode tracking.
And was Tim O'Neill doing that?
Tim? It was Tim.
Because he started out in barcodes before he started out in software.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we go, Steve Richards and I, little arm wrestle, who's the oldest carrier and who's the oldest provider. So I think we date our history somewhere in 1988, 89, somewhere about that. But we use those of you who will hear this and remember the data wells, that was what we first, data wands, I think they're called data wands. So we actually...
They were like a pen, right?
It was like a pen.
It was like a pen that had a little like a camera on
pen.
the end, and you swiped it
swiped it
across.
over.
I know.
I don't know anything about IT, but I know it was a beat retrieve system. That's what they told us, and it was a big thing. We went to DOS and MS,
Yep.
but the whole concept was we were a precursor to the barcode. So, however O'Neill's been around, we were one of their first customers.
That is so cool. So, but you were already in the business, but when did you start to really be focused? So you went to the Beacons conference, but you were moving. You were selling the moving services at that point, or were you selling the records?
No, I was a corporate sales rep, so part of the
Okay.
relocation. So I did everything in the old days called office and industrial O&I.
Yep.
So I do O&I. I did record storage. At the time, record storage was so much easier to sell. Not a lot from a commissioned salesperson, but it was easy to sell. My father-in-law at the time loved the business, and it was just fun to sell. But it was, as I said, I was a 5-tool salesperson. Could do corporate reloads. I could do O&I. I could do some other commodity storage, but record storage. And at the time, our competitor was Bell & Howell.
Oh,
That was
yes.
the Bell & Howell. It was at the time, and they were
Right.
big, and they were phenomenal. And those of you know the history, remember it was Fran Tarkington. Remember the company who overtook and started that, and so he would come in. And so their original acquisition was the Beacons Moving and Storage Company. That Beacons Moving and Storage had their own. So we were an agent for Beacons, Pacific Storage, but Beacons had their own company stores, and Beacons, started record storage, I think in Nebraska. I can have my history wrong, but they were having record storage. And Bell & Howell came in, bought the Beacons Moving and Storage, and we always, you'd be shocked. Remember, they bought it for $1 a box. That was the industry.
Oh, my
$1 a
goodness.
box. That was what we had heard. So $1 a box.
Yeah. So because I came in probably 10 or 12, or I don't know how many years after, but by the time I met you, you were fully records focused. You seemed to be fully record, like you were fully engaged in the records portion of the
What
business.
year what did that have been?
Like that's got to be 28 years ago.
Okay.
27, 28 years.
Okay. So about that time, and bless his heart, Bob Foy passed away, and our company had since been led and brought on with Greg Tudor.
Yep.
And Greg Tudor, our current president CEO, saw the vision, understood the importance of record storage, and he has been really the pioneer to kind of drive that process. And we had some structural challenges where initially, as a manager, we were centralized. So we had a manager in Sacramento, a manager in Modesto, and a manager in Stockton. And Greg came early on, made the decision that we kind of need to make some changes. And at that point, we literally kind of bifurcated, and there was another gentleman who took over the moving. He had been a moving past, great guy, and I sort of spearheaded the record.
Right.
So we really made a conscious decision, split the company, and I just focused strictly on record storage.
Yeah, and that's when I first connected with you, is when you were in the record storage side. So let's kind of jump into the not within the company, but within the greater industry, because when I first knew you, you were already deeply involved in the industry. Like you were already a leader in the industry. Yeah. So what was the connection at that point to Prism? Prism was the predecessor of one of the predecessors of iSigma, but you were deeply involved in Prism. And that's how I met you.
I think I've always liked to volunteer, always liked to get involved. I remember volunteering for my first committee, and I can't remember what it was, but the individual was Neil Goldman.
Yep.
Remember Neil?
From Iron Mountain.
From Iron Mountain. But he was Pierce Leahy at the time.
Right. He started at Pierce, right?
This
and then
was
he came
Pierce.
Yes.
Prior to Iron Mountain, this was Pierce Leahy.
Yeah.
So I can still remember the excitement that I had my phone call. It was a phone conference committee, and somehow it was like rain involved. Like Neil couldn't make it to the office, something like that. So Neil was one of the first guys who sort of introduced me to the structure, so I became a volunteer and served on that committee and then a couple other committees. Then over the course of time, we transitioned, and then I had my stint in the leadership.
Right.
This was, somebody asked me today, we were ACRC at the time.
Right.
And then, so from there we went to Prism,
Yep.
Prism International.
Right. ACRC predeceded Prism, right?
did.
I should have mentioned that. ACRC Prism. But were you an ACRC president or were you a Prism?
I was a Prism president.
Right.
I think Rick asked me today, and Jenny asked me a couple of years ago, and I looked at the wall. I think it was 2002 was my term.
Right. Okay.
I was a president. And somebody else, we talked earlier today, my conference was Vancouver, so I could be wrong my dates, but my memory was Vancouver. Whenever that conference was, that was my conference as president.
Yeah, I believe that because I think that was 2001.
Okay.
That's because my recollection is 2001 was the first time. That's the time I came in tape recorded.
Really?
And I met Lori. I was taping. I volunteered to tape at the back of that Vancouver one. That's where I met Steve Richards.
Oh my gosh.
And I promised to tape at the back of the room if they would just let me in. And that's how I got access to the very first conference. But for some reason, I went out for dinner with you that night. I got invited. I don't know how.
Oh my gosh.
I got invited for dinner with you and the board. Literally, you guys went out to this really cool restaurant, and somehow I went along for the ride.
That's pretty amazing.
What was so cool about it is here I am, a complete noob, and you guys weirdly took me under your wing. I don't know what it was, because I was kind of geeky running around pushing tape buttons back when we had cassettes. And that's how you and I first met, was at that Vancouver conference.
I think that's the beauty of this industry. I think over the course of time, and it's changed flavors and tones from the record storage, adding the shredding, the conferences, but as a whole, just the camaraderie. My kids were here today, and I was very blessed because of the conference and the award. And trying to explain to my son that you have competitors in your marketplace, and they go to the same conferences, and we share and we learn, we understand, we grow. It's just the nature of the industry.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think one of the things you and I have learned, having been around the industry, it's not a big industry. And when we were in the Prism side, we were also on the NAID side, right? You were coming to NAID conferences for many years, and despite them being separate conferences, there was also a camaraderie that happened when you were on the NAID side and on the Prism side. This thing just kept evolving with us. So when back in the day, you've always been involved, but where were some of the major turning points that you've seen in your career? You got honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award today, but throughout the years you were involved in committees and boards, but there's been turning points in the industry. Were there certain ones you look back on and go, that was kind of a pivotal moment in the industry, when something major happened, things that occurred sort of in the greater industry that sort of got consolidated because of this association and the work we all did together?
Yeah, it's funny, I haven't thought, but I guess a couple of things will come to my mind. That I remember that as an industry, there was always this struggle between the independents and Iron Mountain. And I remember at the time we used to have these fall symposiums that would go to a location. It was like an Embassy Suites because we had there was free alcohol at happy hour, and they were conducive to a great conference. And the symposiums were great, but it was always this sort of anti-Iron Mountain mentality. And I always struggled with that.
Yeah.
I struggled with the concept that, we as an industry couldn't have it. And I'm going to claim that my tenure on the board was one of the first times we nominated and selected an Iron Mountain representative. And I remember, do you remember Janet Mayhew?
Yes.
Absolutely sweet
wonderful
person.
Yes.
Very dynamic. She was always leading the symposiums and was very instrumental. I think, and my history, and I'm very bad at dates, but I think I remember she was one of the first, she was the first Iron Mountain representative on the board. And I have always felt that Iron Mountain was good for our industry in accepting. And I've always been a proponent, there were those of the class that when Iron Mountain made a mistake, some people wanted to go and regale that and laughed, and I always thought that was not good for the industry.
No, and you know what? I
has.
think about that a lot because especially when Richard Reese was part of.
I was going to mention that.
Yeah, like he was such a genuine contributor. Like Iron Mountain gave. I mean, remember when we went through the whole fire?
That was going to be my other one. We went Orlando. In fact, I was talking to Nate. That Nate, that was the first time I met Nate. Is that there was a contingent of could be 1,000 or whatever it was that we all jumped on a plane. We flew to Orlando and we sat in the ballroom of Orlando during the NFPA 232 hearing, stuff like that. And first time Nate was with Recall, and he and I had just had this conversation. And we stayed at a hotel there in Orlando by Disneyland. We just spent all day anticipating making a vote for an industry because there was some dramatic impacts. And we had some great pioneers, as I kind of referenced today, that led that industry and led that fight and led that preservation, which I think we prevailed and it was good for us. But I remember there was a lot in that fire. That was a really big component.
But related to that, what I felt like going back to how much Iron Mountain contributed to, like they put enormous amounts of cash into the industry to support what we became, what we evolved to, and so many of the standards that we adopted came out of. And I believe Richard, it came from leadership, but he pushed to be a part of this, and he was always at the events, like the $3 billion company or whatever they were at the time. And he was showing up and literally contributing on a regular basis. And I deeply connect with your belief about that because, I don't know, sometimes it's hard for us little guys. And you guys have always had a really cool company, but we needed the big guys to give us stability.
I remember that. As times transitioned, Neil B. Goldman became sort of a guidepost, or he facilitated Richard Reese's interaction with public and the industry and stuff like that. So he would always facilitate the new incoming PRISM new president. So I remember vividly that opportunity that Neil facilitated, but the intent was, as the new president, he facilitated my meeting and sit down briefly with Richard Reese and just have a little one-on-one.
Right.
But I'll never forget, I think more importantly, at a conference, very vividly, he always said, there was two things that he said in that conference. We've all probably heard it. One of them was he stood up and he told everybody, this industry is the second best industry that he's ever come across. And everybody always asked him, what was the first? And he said, I don't know. I've never answered that. He never answered that.
At one point, and this is, I don't know,
Do you remember
12,
that?
Yeah. Well, I had a podcast interview on my first podcast, The RimPro Report. And I said, you have said this thing for many years.
Right.
And I said, I need an answer from you on that. And he wouldn't give it to me.
Yeah,
he said, I don't know. There's one out there that might be better, but I'm not sure.
But he
what
never
it was.
Said it.
He never told us.
This is the second best industry, but he didn't ever say number one.
And it was so frustrating. Yeah. But the other thing that we're talking about Richard Reese and Iron Mountain, but this is about you. But one of the things I always thought was interesting about him is he said he was both incredibly competent and confident and all those kind of things. But at the same time, he always used to say, I jumped in the river at the right time.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Right? Yeah. Which is, he got the success because he just happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right connections and all that. And he said it was in many ways purely luck because there's a whole bunch of people his age, they didn't jump in the river at the right time. And he happened to win the sort of the consolidation battle at that point. But, no, I think the industry has been served by many really cool people. Who are some of the other standout people that influenced you over the years in terms of made an impact on your life?
I don't want to leave the one thought. The other component that Richard Reese that had an impact on my life. I remember the conference. I remember sitting there. He stood up amongst all of us independents and said, I am not your competition.
Right.
He said, you independents should dominate your market. I'm not the threat. You need to be the best service provider in your market. He was essentially challenging us. He was essentially advocating that we should be the ones who dominate our market. And I've always had that as a premise.
Yeah.
That Iron Mountain is not my competition.
Yep.
That my competition is to make my company, make us to be the strong and be the issue. And I just love the way he just, like a father to the children amongst, he stood up there powerfully,
Yep.
said, I'm not your competition.
Yeah.
Because everybody always had this mentality. Hey,
I remember that. I remember that as well.
And we were not the competition.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Who else were major influences on this journey?
I guess there's so many names that come to my mind. I would have to say that, Bob Haskins
Yep.
was a tremendous influence, and primarily because, I served with Bob it was a 5-year stint, and Bob had always commented that we were such of a different personality. If Bob and I were sitting in the same, he was so eclectic and so dynamic and so boisterous, and I was pretty much quieter and shy. And we've had some good board meetings, but I remember there was a gentleman named Michael, and it was with Iron Mountain, who I served as the president 2 years, and I can't remember the name that they came up with, but he was another Iron Mountain guy named Michael that was very involved.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of his. Yeah,
and he was the president. I was his secretary, and so as we moved to the chairs, then Bob Haskins became my secretary. So it was one of those where the president picked the vice
Right.
president, and so there was this like off thing. There were so many. I remember Reese. Ron Reese was just
Yes.
such a wonderful
From Data
man.
Safe.
From Data Safe, and I'd have lunch with him. I lived in Sacramento, and we go down to San Francisco and kind of visit. And Ron Reese was just a kind of a vibrant guy. We've had some very good executive directors over time.
Yep.
Jim Booth was a phenomenal, influential person that I think had a powerful influence over time. And I think those are some of the ones. It's a great question, Tom. One I should probably reflect on more. But
no,
those are
I think sometimes when you kind of look back on a lifetime, there's sort of events and
Yeah.
there's people.
Yeah.
And those two are often, because I think the cool thing for me about even your and my relationship is it's beyond just this industry. Granted, that's often our connecting point, but I wouldn't hesitate, and neither would you. If you were in my backyard, we would be together, right? It's a non-negotiable because of the deep friendships we create in this industry too. We're not just colleagues; we become really close friends over the years.
I believe that, and we adopted, as I said early on, the O'Neill software, and we were early on with Tim O'Neill. But I've always said I think the best thing Tim O'Neill ever did was get on his boat, sail into the harbor, and bring Ian Thomas. And, we just had Ian, and we've seen him show up. And I think Ian was a powerful influence, not just as an O'Neill customer, but as an industry. And he was just a pioneer in many ways to this industry. So that was one that also comes to my mind.
Yeah. So today, when you were awarded the award, you talked a little bit about your family and the people in your company. And there was a lot of emotion there. Obviously, I get that. But what's as you look back and you reflect on this massively cool career in this industry, we talked a little bit about the highlights and the people. But what are some of the things that you're most grateful for in terms of this journey? Like what are the things you got that make you emotional about it? I know what, often when I think about the years I've had in this industry, there's little things that I go, I feel like there was a sense of purpose, or there was and I don't even know what I'm asking because I didn't form the question, but you to be able to stand in front of a room and see 600-700 people stand and applaud for this lifetime of achievement, that's got to feel pretty darn good.
I remember last year in the room when Lori Palmer got it, and I don't remember the first two, but I remember Lori, and I remember a sense of just overwhelming recognition of her as an individual.
Yeah.
What she has done. I should have named her. And I remember the room just went crazy, and her sentiment. And that was the immediate thought when Nate called me. I literally was overwhelmed. I was in my office by myself, and I found myself with a tear. I just couldn't believe it. I was just, I've had awards or different accolades over the years, but it was just the concept of what kind of brought me to that room of what I experienced when Lori got it. I remember doing some research and saying I recognized, Steve Richard got it before myself, Pat DeFries, but I remember feeling that emotion in the room, well deserved of Lori, of just what she has done to this industry, and all of a sudden to recognize I'm following Lori in that same sentiment of the award. Are you kidding me? It was just, and I remember calling my boss Greg and explaining it, and it's like I cried. Like every time, try to explain, that, and like I say, I've gotten awards or different things over the years, but just something to achieve that. Which in the conversation, Nate said, welcome to bring your family, and I have a very supportive boss. You talk about what I enjoy. But Greg has been phenomenal, and it was his suggestion, would you like to bring your kids? And so I had 4 kids coming from 3 different states, 4 different airlines, arrived in San Diego within 20 minutes of each other.
No. Yeah, and I think you basically started there with, which is, Greg and the company, but also your family, and you have a big, beautiful family, and that's got to feel pretty special to get a Lifetime Achievement Award with many of your kids here, and some of your grandkids were here, and Laura, and just the immense pride, and I am so proud for you, because I've watched you for many years and have always honored the incredible human you are.
Thank you,
not
Tom.
not just the work you do, but just the human you are.
Thank you.
And that is evidenced in a set of kids showing up to support you in this day. So
very supportive. A lovely wife and wonderful children. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, on behalf of whatever I can say on behalf of this industry, thank you for all of the contribution. Thank you for contributing in ways that nobody ever knows, because when you're president, I remember working with many people over the years who were presidents and how much time it takes, but the committees and the calls and the conferences and just showing up and just contributing all the time, it's an immense gift you've given us over the years, and I hope that today will resound in your heart for a long time, because you greatly deserve it. So thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.